On the 14th of February 2011, police found Nubia Barahona's tiny body inside a black bin bag in the back of her adoptive father Jorge Barahona's pickup truck along Interstate 95 in Palm Beach County. Her body had partially decomposed from being covered in chemicals, possibly pesticides. Her twin brother Victor was also found inside the vehicle, severely injured but alive. He was suffering seizures due to being covered in chemical burns and inhalation of toxic gas. Their adoptive father, Jorge Barahona, was found passed out nearby.
Investigators believe Victor and his twin sister Nubia may have endured horrific abuse that ended with the 10-year-old girl dead, her brother critically injured.
How had Nubia died? And who had hurt her twin brother Victor? Had they been hurt by the two people who had vowed to love and care for them? This is the tragic and heartbreaking case of Nubia Barahona and how she was failed by so many people. Fraternal twins Nubia and Victor Doctor were born on the 26th of May 2000 in Washington at Jackson Memorial Hospital to their mother, Sandra Doctor. Sandra was homeless and an addict and had had 4 children before the twins were born, all of whom had been taken from her by the Department of Children and Families. From the moment they were born, Nubia and Victor's lives were heavily chronicled by the DCF. Nubia was born with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which meant her body couldn't make 2 key hormones, the one that helps the body retain salt and another which helps the body deal with physical stress. This made Nubia dependent on medication, and so it was initially suggested that she be placed in a medical foster home, but she instead remained with her biological mother, who claimed to be sober. In 2003, the twins were taken away from their mother, who reportedly was abusing drugs again, and they were handed over to their father, Victor Bustillo. The stay with their father was short-lived, however, as Victor Bustillo was charged with inappropriately touching a little girl in their neighborhood. And so, the twins were placed in foster care and eventually ended up in the home of Jorge and Carmen Barahona in Miami, Florida in early 2004. The Barahonas became licensed foster parents in 1999 and had adopted their first child, a boy, by 2001. So their home was believed to be a safe and loving environment for children to grow up in. But this was so far from the truth. Jorge and Carmen had been married 8 years when the twins joined them and 2 other foster children in 2004. Carmen had previously been married to another man and had a son and a daughter with him. They divorced after 24 years together, and 2 months later, on the 19th of January 1996, she married Jorge Barahona. She was 45 and he was 38. Carmen worked for several years for one of South Florida's largest medical practices, and Jorge owned a pest control company which he operated out of a red pickup truck that often carried lethal chemicals in plastic jugs. The couple had another source of income, state subsidies, for the 4 foster children they adopted. It was predicted that they were likely receiving around $1,200 a month in adoption subsidies. They all lived together in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house Carmen had owned since her first marriage. From the outside, the home seemed normal and peaceful, but behind the high gates and heavy shrubbery, the house was filled with horrible abuse and hatred. The next few years for Nubia and Victor were hell, but the abuse was kept secret and confined within the walls of the home. As their birth father's case wound through the criminal courts and eventually resulted in 5 years probation, the twins lost all contact with him. They started kindergarten at Royal Palm Elementary School, and one day Nubia wet her pants. Thinking it was no big deal, the teacher told Nubia she would call Carmen and have her bring a change of clothes. Scared, Nubia told the teacher, "Mama's gonna hit me with a chancleta on the bottom of my feet." Nubia proceeded to lock herself in a bathroom and cried hysterically. Just months after being placed with the Barahonas, a nurse noted that Nubia was missing medical appointments, despite the appointments being required to manage Nubia's ongoing condition. By first grade, the twins switched to Blue Lakes Elementary, and within the next 3 years, Florida's child abuse hotline received multiple reports on Nubia, all of them initiated by someone at her school. The first report arrived in January 2005, and it stated that Nubia reportedly told someone at her school that her father was touching her. Child welfare supervisors could not determine whether Nubia was referring to her birth father, who had lost custody at least a year earlier, or Jorge Barahona. They determined that she meant her birth father, and the case was closed. Then, in February 2006, school staff called DCF again to report bruising on her chin and neck, and they suspected it had come from her parents. The Barahonas were ordered to bring her to an appointment with the Department of Health's Child Protection team in Miami, but they did not show up until a week later. By then, most of the bruising had disappeared, and state doctors agreed with the Barahonas' assertion that the bruise was from a fall. Further complaints were filed in March 2007 when school authorities reported that Nubia was extremely thin, always hungry, was dirty, and had an unpleasant odor. DCF investigated the claims, but they were met with insistence from the Barahonas that Nubia's condition was not from hygiene problems or neglect, but caused by her medical condition. Once again, the investigation was dropped. In 2008, the Barahonas began the adoption process of the twins. Nubia's nurse, who had taken care of her medical issues, recommended that the Barahonas not be allowed to adopt the children. Several school employees also testified at the adoption hearing that they had serious concerns about the couple's custody of the kids. They were also met with resistance from the twins' volunteer guardian ad litem, Paul Newman. Paul Newman had seen something in the couple that scared him, and he said so to everyone in the child welfare system who would listen. The Barahonas fought hard, however, and they claimed Paul Newman was operating behind their backs and unfairly interfering with their adoption attempt. They claimed they had a personal conflict with Newman and cited that as the reason he was accusing them of neglect. To override Paul Newman, the Barahonas wrote letters appealing to people as high up as the then governor, Charlie Crist. In a series of 3 letters spanning the summer of 2007 through early 2008, the Barahonas accused Newman of conspiring with employees of the Miami school system, tampering with witnesses, and trying to snatch the twins from their custody. They further stated that Newman was violating their civil rights. One of the letters, in June 2007, said, "They have been deceitful with us all along, and we feel that we have been taken for fools." The Barahonas described the care they were providing to the twins positively, stating that they were raising their children with love, as any mother and father would do. Paul Newman was quickly removed as the children's guardian without any explanation, shortly before the adoption was finalized. And in the end, the Barahonas won the case, and the twins were formally adopted in May of 2009. By early 2010, the twins were repeatedly being beaten, punched, and bound with clear tape by Jorge and Carmen. They were also being left for days on end in the home's only bathroom. Complaints similar to the ones received in 2007 were again raised by the school's authorities. This time they were adding that Nubia was losing her hair and had become nervous and jittery. They also noted that she was so uncontrollably hungry that she was stealing food. DCF was met with the same reasoning from the Barahonas as before, that it was caused by her medical condition and the medication she was taking, and so the investigation was once again dropped. Later in the year, a teacher told school counselor Carol Pena that Nubia smelled very strongly, and other children were complaining and she needed help handling it. The counselor started meeting with Nubia for a half hour near the end of the school day a few times a week. Pena spoke to Nubia and asked her about her home life. Nubia told the counselor that she was okay with the other children using up the hot water before her or getting more sweets and cake than her, especially since her 2 adopted siblings were disabled. During one of these meetings, Peña caught Nubia stealing chocolate from a teacher's jar, and when the counselor asked why, Nubia said it was because she was hungry. So Peña arranged for Nubia to get milk and fruit at school twice a day and upped their meetings to every day. In the 20 meetings Peña had with Nubia, she never disclosed problems she was having at home, and she never showed any fear. She said she loved her mother and spoke about spending weekends with her father. By June of 2010, Nubia had missed a lot of school, and so they called the child hotline once again. They said how Nubia had uncontrollable hunger, was jittery, and her hair was falling out. They gave DCF her entire history from first grade through to that moment, including notes to excuse absences that weren't from specialists who oversaw Nubia's treatments. DCF told them that they would make record of it, but on June 24th, the case was dismissed, with no services recommended. By summer of 2010, the Barahonas removed the twins from public school, saying they planned to homeschool them. Victor would later tell another foster parent that their homeschooling only lasted 2 days. By September of 2010, the twins were home 24 hours a day, and the beatings, hitting, punching, and bindings continued, with greater frequency. On February the 10th, 2011, the Department of Children and Families Child Abuse Hotline received a report that the Barahonas were binding the twins' hands and feet and forcing them to stand in a bathtub for hours.
And how are the other children being abused?
They are, when they're being punished, they're being taped up and with their arms and legs and put in a bathtub.
Is there water in the bathtub?
No.
Okay.
And they're in there all day and all night, and she undoes their arms when they eat.
On what is believed to be the next day, the 11th of February 2011, Victor said he remembered seeing Jorge take Nubia from the bathroom with her hands and feet still bound and into the bedroom. Victor said he could hear his sister screaming as she was being beaten. Victor said he stayed in the bathtub listening to her screams and cries until they finally stopped. On the 14th of February 2011, a Florida road ranger noticed a truck at about 5:15 a.m. on the side of Interstate 95. When he saw the truck still there 2.5 hours later, he called the police and then went over to it. Here he found Victor in the truck, covered in chemicals and shivering. He asked Victor a few times where were his mummy and daddy. Victor pointed over at Jorge, who was passed out on the ground. West Palm Beach Fire Rescue responded to the call and arrived on the scene. Here they found 53-year-old Jorge Barahona on the ground and 10-year-old Victor Barahona in the cab of the truck. Both were conscious by the time rescuers arrived, but Victor was convulsing with seizures. One fireman was overcome by a strong smell when he approached the truck. The bed of the truck was full of plastic containers of chemicals, some unlabeled. The truck was branded with the name of Jorge's pest extermination business, causing the investigators to believe the chemicals were pesticides. One unlabeled container held some form of acid, which made firefighters wonder why an exterminator would have such chemicals. Further investigation revealed that Victor was covered in acid, and there was so much of it in the car that it soaked the carpets and seats, making the air around the truck poisonous. Victor and Jorge were taken to separate hospitals for their injuries. A city hazmat team and the State Department of Environmental Protection arrived by the afternoon to decontaminate the area. At about 3:45 p.m., one of the DEP contractors, sorting through the tubs of chemicals in the bed of the truck, found a black garbage bag. When he opened the bag, he found the human remains of Nubia Barahona. Her body was so badly decomposed and difficult to identify as she had been covered with acid and other hazardous chemicals. Victor was initially taken to nearby St. Mary's Medical Center and then transferred 2 days later to Jackson Memorial Hospital's burn center. He had suffered severe internal reactions to the inhalation of toxic fumes in the truck and had chemical burns over large portions of his body. Doctors also found several previous injuries to the boy, including a broken collarbone, broken arm, scars on his buttocks and lower abdomen, and rope marks on both wrists. Victor was finally released on the 2nd of March 2011 and placed in a therapeutic foster home. Victor told a caretaker about the years of abuse him and his sister had endured. He described how Jorge had several times wrapped a plastic bag around his head, choking him until he nearly passed out. He said the man once glued his eyes shut and made him eat a cockroach. He said how ice water was poured over him and his sister. Their mouths were taped and their hands and feet were bound in different positions, including hogtied. Victor described how once he was hit with a mop that left a scar on his head. He was also punched by Jorge, which scarred his lip. At times, the twins were punished by being left outside in garbage or recycling bins. At mealtimes, Victor said he and his twin sister were only allowed to eat bread and milk maybe once a week in the bathtub, whilst the other children in the home dined on beef, rice and beans. Any leftovers from the supposed good food would just go to the family's dog. The report, which had come in to the DCF on February 10, 2011, 4 days before the truck was found, which stated that the children were apparently bound and forced to stand in a bathtub for hours at the family home, came from the therapist of Carmen Barahona's granddaughter, identified as AP in court documents. AP had alleged to her therapist that while visiting her grandmother's house, the twins were bound by their hands and feet and made to stand for hours in a bathtub. Their hands were unbound only when it was time to eat. She also alleged that she was not permitted to speak to them when she used the bathroom. The therapist told the operator that AP felt threatened by her grandmother to keep quiet. Carmen allegedly told AP not to tell people about how the twins were treated because it was a family secret. AP was 6 years old when the twins were first brought into the house, and she would regularly visit her grandmother before and after school. She said that she saw the couple force Victor and Nubia to strip naked and walk in circles in the living room, or to stand naked for hours inside a trash can or in the bathtub. AP said, "We just had to watch." When AP asked her grandmother why the twins were only fed milk and bread, her grandmother just told her that's what they deserved. Other evidence she offered of the horrific abuse included Jorge trying to drown Victor and the couple tying a rope around Victor's neck and trying to strangle him. Once Jorge forced all the children to play doctor and touch each other inappropriately, and another time she saw Nubia lying naked in bed with Jorge. AP said, "It was very scary at times, seeing how they mistreated Nubia and Victor. I wasn't allowed to go into the bathroom unless I was being supervised. They would always have the curtain closed, but there was a time when I saw Nubia and Victor in the bathtub tied with ropes or tape." AP nevertheless told a child therapist about the abuse right before Nubia's death, and the therapist called DCF and told them what she had heard.
And how are the other children being abused?
They are, when they're being punished, they're being taped up and with their arms and legs and put in a bathtub. And they're in there all day and all night. And she undoes their arms when they eat. But she also states that when she does need to use the bathroom, that she's not allowed to speak to them. That the grandmother watches.
Jorge and Carmen's 11-year-old autistic son also tried to tell a DCF investigator visiting the home shortly before Nubia's death about a secret, but the investigator claimed Carmen dismissed him as low-functioning and told him to watch TV in another room. Jorge Barahona was arrested on child abuse charges against Victor and moved from Columbia Hospital to the Palm Beach County Jail on February 16, 2011. While in custody, he confessed to police that he had been upset by the death of his daughter and had driven to Palm Beach County with the plan to take his own life by setting himself on fire. He said the shoulder of the I-95 was chosen so he could be easily found. He claimed he gave Victor a handful of sleeping pills, then with the boy's head in his lap, poured gasoline over his own head. He then attempted to ignite a lighter, but could not do it as he did not want to take Victor with him. Investigators found a red gasoline container in the truck filled with acid. When asked by police why he did not have as many obvious burns as Victor, Jorge said that some of the gas must have splashed the boy. The police concluded that Jorge's version of events was inconsistent with the boy's injuries. Autopsy results concluded that Nubia had been beaten to death on the 11th of February, the day a DCF official came to investigate the call that had come in from the therapist. According to the police report, Jorge allegedly repeatedly punched and beat Nubia, who screamed and cried until she was dead. When Carmen and Jorge were interviewed, they indicated why Victor and Nubia might have been singled out from their two other siblings, who were also adopted. Carmen said Jorge desperately tried to separate the four children, as the other siblings were getting terrible diarrhea, and Jorge believed it was because the twins were poisoning them. Jorge also said that he believed Nubia tried to poison his soda and was using rat poison on him and others in the family. Carmen told investigators that she and her husband had been separated for 6 months, when in fact they had never been apart. The couple's other two children were taken from the home and placed in foster care. Carmen Barahona filed for divorce from Jorge in late February, but was arrested and charged with first-degree murder on the 5th of March and was held without bond. Jorge and Carmen were arrested in February 2011 and were waiting trial for Nubia's murder and aggravated child abuse. Jorge was also facing an attempted murder charge. Together, they faced an 18-count indictment including 1 count of first-degree murder, 8 counts of child abuse resulting in great bodily harm, 1 count of child neglect resulting in great harm, 6 counts of child neglect with no great harm, 1 count of child neglect, no great bodily harm, and 1 count of mutilating a dead body. They faced the death penalty if convicted. After being informed he had to attend a hearing on a felony child abuse charge, Jorge tried to injure himself twice. He first jumped backwards off of a sink in his cell, landing on his head. He was examined and declared competent to stand before a judge, but refused to cooperate with deputies and did not show up for the hearing. At his hearing, his bail was set for $1 million. He later attempted to injure himself again and was taken to a hospital for a CT scan, then returned to jail and placed in the mental health unit. At first, both Carmen and Jorge pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder and the child abuse charges. Jorge's trial was set to begin on the 28th of September 2015, but his attorneys requested more time. On the 21st of February 2020, Carmen changed her plea to guilty of first-degree murder and multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. She also agreed to testify against Jorge as part of her plea deal.
Now, at this time, you're entering a plea of guilt to all counts in the indictment that apply to you. Is that your understanding? And count 1, you're pleading guilty to first-degree murder. Do you understand that? You're facing a maximum of life in prison in that, or the death penalty. Do you understand that?
The plea deal was finalized 9 years after a grand jury indicted Jorge and Carmen for the horrific death and the months-long torture and abuse of Victor. Due to Carmen's plea deal, Jorge's lawyers asked for his trial date to be moved back once again. His trial was rescheduled for April 2020, but was postponed by the coronavirus pandemic. He was also granted a new defense attorney after it was revealed his previous lawyer was under investigation over discrepancies with his legal billing. Jorge cut off communications with his legal team, and the judge in his case appointed him a new lawyer. The case has been moving through the courts for over 12 years now, and switching attorneys only adds more time to the time frame. As of today, Jorge's trial has yet to be rescheduled. Justice delayed is justice denied, and after 12 years, Nubia Barahona has been denied justice longer than she was alive on this earth. Even in death, Nubia is still being failed by the system, and Jorge Barahona is successfully escaping trial. And as part of Carmen's plea deal, her sentencing has been deferred until her cooperation with prosecutors against Jorge is complete. If she does not fully cooperate, she could still face the death penalty.
Not only does she have to testify, she has to cooperate, and she has to testify truthfully in the case against her co-defendant, her husband, the real killer of Nubia.
So as of today, no one has been convicted for Nubia's murder. On March the 1st, 2021, Jorge Barahona was attacked in the detention center as he slept, and he suffered multiple bruises on his face, a nosebleed, and a small cut on his nose. He was attacked by 5 other inmates because of the nature of his pending charges.
The 5 inmates charged with the March 1st incident say they beat up Barahona while he slept because, quote, of the nature of his charges. The 53-year-old Barahona has multiple bruises on his face, his nose was bleeding, and a small cut on the left side of his nose.
The Florida Department of Children and Families has been heavily criticized for their handling of the Barahona case. It was said that DCF's handling of the case was inept and a failure of common sense and listening. Judge Cindy Lederman expressed outrage at the actions of one of the workers assigned to the case, Andrea Fleary. On the 10th of February 2011, Fleary visited the Barahona home to investigate the hotline call that had come in from the therapist, but despite not making contact with the children, she reported they were safe. When Fleary told the judge about the other child in the house that tried to alert her to the abuse, she said the conversations had taken place late in the evening. Judge Lederman responded, "So we don't do investigations on weekends? Is that what you're telling me?" Fleary was placed on paid administrative leave, but then fired.
I didn't do this job because of the money, okay, because there's no money. If I tell you what my bank account looked like the day that I got fired, you would cry yourself, okay? No money in this. I did this because I love to work with children, okay? And I can go back and this is one case that blew up, but it's many more cases where I have saved kids. And the department didn't stand behind me and say, yes, this here was a mess up, a mishap. But look at all the other kids, all the other parents who appreciate what I have done for their family.
David Wilkins admitted his department mishandled the foster care case surrounding the murder of Nubia. When asked how they could have ignored signs of Nubia's abuse, such as hair loss and constant hunger, Wilkins stated that the medical conditions of the children complicated the decision-making of their investigators. Wilkins also stated that the Barahonas had been deceiving the system for quite some time. Wilkins, who had only been at DCF for a few months at the time of Nubia's death, also criticized the organization's abuse hotline, comparing it to a low-cost call center. He said, "They have a low-cost call center mentality. You don't want to get off the phone in this situation. You could tell the operator wanted to get off the phone because he's measured by how long his call is." Wilkins said that employees are rated by how quickly they handle calls, because in the past, they had been criticized for taking too long to answer calls, causing callers to hang up. Wilkins also claimed that the technology was outdated, making it difficult to piece together different parts of a case from separate calls. Since then, he's claimed to have plans to remedy these situations. In response to the twins being adopted despite objections from their guardian, Paul Newman, head of the Guardian program, Sonia Farah, said the program did everything it could at the time, despite admitting Newman had concerns. She said the judge overseeing the adoption had heard other evidence and decided to place them with the Barahonas.
The kids that I was involved with live in this house, will always be in my mind, my heart. The pain that these kids went through should go through the heads of everybody who cares about kids or about people.
A grand jury report later concluded that DCF gave the Barahonas a pass every time allegations of abuse surfaced. The DCF promised to reform in the wake of the Barahona case. The agency plans to re-engineer the way in which cases are handled, and they plans to bring on an additional 80 investigators to South Florida to help reduce caseloads for workers. Additionally, training was promised to be provided for hotline abuse operators. In April 2017, Victor Barahona received $5 million from Florida lawmakers as part of a settlement with the Florida Department of Children and Families. The state's government said the department poorly handled the case of the Barahona twins and that the department had many red flags they did not pay attention to. Honestly, I have no words for this case. I can't believe how many people failed Nubia and her brother. The DCF were warned so many times and so many calls were made reporting the abuse that they were facing. And even the fact that they were adopted in the first place, considering the resistance from their guardian, their teachers, and Nubia's nurse, is absolutely shocking. Every child deserves a chance at a life filled with love and laughter and to be part of a loving, caring family environment. But Nubia and Victor were robbed of this. Instead, they were horribly abused and tortured by the two people who were supposed to love, protect, and care for them. Jorge and Carmen abused their power and treated the twins in a disgusting manner. Every child deserves parents, but not all parents deserve children.